Good afternoon. It is afternoon. Cathar Unconditional Love, number 24. Our higher consciousness. Let me start with a story, an old story. I think it originated in China, but anyway, there was this horse breeder who worked for a duke, and he was getting on in years and it's time for him to retire, and the duke was worried because he loved his horses and he needed a good horse breeder. So he said, do you know another person who's good as yourself? And the horse breeder said, yes. He said, I do actually. He said, I know another horse breeder. He lives in the forest. He's much better than I am. I haven't seen him for some years. And the duke said, well, look, could you see if you can get him to come to my employ, you know, so I've got somebody when you leave. So the horse breeder who's retiring saw his friend, and he said yes, he'd work for the duke. And the horse breeder said, well, look, he said, he's looking for really good horses. He said, if you see a really good horse, let him know. And until I retire, but if you see a good horse, just let him know. So, and he said, I will. So after about 6 months, he told his horse breeder that he had found an amazing horse, a wild horse, beautiful. It was a yellow mare. And so the horse breeder went up and he told the duke, and he said, look, he's prepared to work for you, but not only that, he's found this amazing, this really beautiful horse. He said, it's a yellow mare. And the duke said, oh, well, okay. He said, I'll be pleased to get it if this horse is so good. So when the horse arrived, it was a black stallion. The duke said, what's going on? You're supposed to have found a yellow mare, and I've got a black stallion in front of me. He said, the guy can't even tell one colour from another, let alone a horse flesh, good horse flesh. And the breeder said, no. He said, he's even better than I thought. He is much better than me. He's looking beyond the sex and the colour. He's looking into the heart of the horse. I'm sure this is a wonderful horse. And of course they checked the horse out, and they trained it and rode, and it was indeed an amazing horse. So the thing was that this guy didn't worry about the sex or the colour. This person could look deep inside, in this case, a horse. And another story. This only happened a week ago, and this friend of mine said, you know, a woman, and she said, this my ex-boyfriend, and she said, when I met him, she thought, oh, he speaks well, elegant type of person, but he's not very good looking, and even ugly. But she said, I don't see that anymore. I see how he's elegant, he's charming, he's absolutely delightful. He's really a beautiful person. So doesn't it happen? We with all of us, we see somebody and we, oh wow, she looks great, or he looks great. Then we start talking, open our mouth, and you see them get a little bit angry, or get a bit upset, or the drinks are not served quick enough, or the food's not served quick enough, and you can see them getting uptight, and suddenly their beauty and their charm seems to just dissipate in front of our eyes. It takes time for us to learn to look in. And so what is in there? Well, we've got our, as we spoke before, our different hemispheres in our brain. We've got our right and our left hemisphere. And it appears that that our right hemisphere, this is where our higher consciousness resides. Now, going right back in history to the Iliad, the Greek ancient myths, and it appears in that writing that the gods actually spoke to people. And it appears from this that they think there was no separation between the two hemispheres at that time. And people felt that it was the gods speaking to them. And that changed. So by the time of Socrates and Plato and people like that, already we were cut off from our hemispheres most people, to varying degrees. And yet Socrates, he talked all his life about the fact that he's had this voice tell him, quite a cheeky voice sometimes, and even tell him trivialities of life, not to do that or do that, do it or don't do it. And he said, this voice would say, if you do that, it'll bring you bad luck. It was this voice, this inner voice, that said to him, don't go into politics, stay and just be a philosopher, influence people that way. And he took notice of this voice. Was it his higher consciousness? Was it what we call outer guidance, or as a guide was talking to him? I don't know. This is lost in the annals of history. But there was certainly something that advised him. And interestingly enough, when he was condemned by the state for corrupting the minds of the youth, in other words, turning them into young revolutionaries, or people to, well, not revolutionaries, but people to think for themselves and have their own ideas, he was accused by the state of corrupting the minds of the youth, and he was ordered to take poison, and he didn't argue, and he said that's fine. He drank the poison. And he had these friends around. Plato was evidently ill at that time, and he wasn't there, but he had a half a dozen of his friends at his deathbed, and they just discussed philosophy and what have you. And his very last words were to, I forget, but one of his friends, he said, look, he said, we owe such and such, he said, we owe him a chook, a hen, make sure we pay him. So that was the last words before he died. He wanted to clear up all his debts. But right throughout history, we've got this inner voice, our higher consciousness, advising us. There was a gentleman in London, and he was walking down the street, and this voice said to him, inner voice said, stop, don't go any further. And he went a few steps further. Then the voice said, inner voice, even louder, said, stop, don't go any further. So he stopped and pretended to do up his shoelaces. Meanwhile, the half dozen people in front of him, this wall collapsed on top of them and killed them. He was saved by an inner voice. So we had that. Now, I don't know about you, but I know sometimes when I'm with friends or I'm talking to people, and I start to talk about somebody, and maybe a bit gossipy or not the right thing to really say. And it's like, it doesn't say stop, but there's something that jumps my brain, and I go, oh, okay, it's not really my business, not really this person's business, and so I take notice. You know, I think, okay, that's going too far. So we have a higher consciousness. It's to do with within our mind. They've done hypnotic experiments where they've in one situation, because with hypnosis you can bring on amnesia, you can do various things, stop people from so they can't speak, but they're deaf mute, which they did on this occasion. And had this person become not a deaf mute, well, a deaf mute, and yet they still asked this person if there was another entity within them. They couldn't speak, but would they raise the small finger of their left hand, and the small finger raised? In other words, there is, under hypnosis, there was this entity that was that could make its presence felt. We have, of course, Philemon, who was the inner voice or the guide of Carl Jung, and he's had a number of situations like that. They had the Egyptian Book of the Dead was dictated to him in 3 days, and he wrote it down, and that was by an old Gnostic in Alexandria. I've forgotten his name. But it was a Gnostic that did exist in Alexandria, and he wrote down the Egyptian Book of the Dead, and which is only within the last couple of years has been actually out, has allowed to be published. I've yet to buy it. So Belicides, I remember, was Belicides of Alexandria. He was a Gnostic in the University, I presume, of Alexandria, or the Library of Alexandria, and it was he who actually dictated the Egyptian Book of the Dead to Carl Jung. Now Carl Jung had this, which he called his guru, teacher, and that was Philemon, Philemon. So I don't know yet whether that was Carl Jung was referring to his inner consciousness or higher consciousness, or it was outer guidance. Let's sort these two out. Our higher consciousness is a part of ourselves, a part of one of the hemispheres in our brain. But there's also a thing called outer guidance. Now, I was told by a very erudite person that, although I haven't found it myself in literature, but Napoleon saw his guide, his spirit guide, on 3 occasions. And he was told by his spirit guide on one occasion that he had 5 years to implement the rights of man, that is liberty, equality and fraternity, which he was doing. But he said if he doesn't do that, he will eventually, it'll be a disaster. And of course, power went to Napoleon's head. He crowned himself emperor, and of course, eventually ended up a disaster. But he did introduce equality, fraternity into the rights of man into most of the countries that they conquered. And one good thing that he did do, that each country that he actually conquered, he wiped out the Inquisition at that time. And the last place that he did that was at the old address, at the present address in the Vatican, and his soldiers went in there and they closed down the torture chambers for the Inquisition in the Vatican. So he's a mixed bag as our Napoleon. He certainly did some wonderful things, and he did some other things which weren't quite so wonderful. But power, I think, corrupted him in the end. And so he has that. There's various books. There's the Cathars and Reincarnation, where Miss Smith and Miss Mills both have had outer guidance, and they talk about that and talk about this situation. I've had that experience. Alas, not like it used to be, but at least I did have the experience over a number of years, about 10 years, where I was told and advised, and it was just a voice. There's no, it's just a normal voice speaking to me, and so I've experienced that myself. One of an old Cathar teacher called Henri of the Boers, and he says that we all, because people say, how do I get in contact with my guide? And he says, we all have that capacity. He said, but what basically has happened, it's a sublimated talent that we all have, all humans have it. But what happens is that with our living, within making money, getting a house, car, raising a family, all the pressures of living that we've had for hundreds of years, what that has done has sublimated a lot of these natural assets or talents that we all have, or all capable of. So the more that we can move away from the materialistic world, which ain't easy, because we all need to live, and we can't all be monks and nuns and all live in a forest or in a cave. We have our commitments and our responsibilities. But at the same time, the more we can become more mystical, open our minds, and learn to let go, the more these sublimated abilities can come to the surface. Maybe somehow your guide contacts with you, or it may be clairvoyance, or you become more psychic, or what happens. But in most of these cases, these people have learnt to let go to quite some degree of all the material things that we're chasing. So here we have it. So we have our higher consciousness, which everyone has within our brain. Religious can also call this our guardian angel. A name, what's in a name? A rose is a rose by any other name. But we also have a thing called outer guidance. Now, sometimes when we're given a warning or an indication, I must tell you that I was in Vietnam, and I had on my left in a helicopter, there was a battle going on, was my boss, Jeff Bosco, who died about 2 years ago, and on my right was JR, John Douglas. And I had a movie camera. Videos went around. And I said to the helicopter pilot, I want to take a movie of the battle. And he said, not on the way in, but he said, on the way back from what we had to do. And I did. He said, now, go down. And at that time, I actually laid down on the floor there of the Huey, the American helicopter, Hueys. And we hit with a burst of gunfire. So when we landed, we examined the damage, and 3 or 4 inches below the air gunner's crown jewels, his testicles, these 6 rounds had gone through. But had I been sitting in my seat, which was in the middle of my fighting companions, 6 rounds would have ploughed through my back. But I was down, happily, taking a movie, and didn't even hear them. But there were those 6 bullet holes right where I was sitting. Now, was it guidance? That at that point in time got me to go down, because it could have been 3 or 4 minutes later, I'd have been dead. Or was it my higher consciousness? But something impelled me at that particular time. That was the time to lay down and get that movie. Or was it a coincidence? I don't know. I still don't know. But it is wonderful that we do have this, our higher consciousness that is there, and it's there to assist us. And it's also wonderful that we do have our spirit guides. So the end result of this is we are not alone. In fact, we are never alone, even though sometimes we feel alone, and this is often a natural state with the situations happening. But in actual fact, we are never alone. On that note, I will talk to you again in the future. Bye-bye for now.